A lot of you have put your multimeter on your engines to see that you have the same current, but there's some confusion about what that current represents, so I wanted to take some time to go over that today. Now, inside the engines, we have the thermostat and we have the aluminum. And the thermostat is pulling material out of the aluminum, but you can see with that rubber gasket, there is no contact. It's not actually touching the aluminum. So the only time you can have that current exchange is when there's water flowing, because water is carrying the ions, and the ions are the highway that the electrons are traveling between the thermostat and the aluminum. When we put the negative terminal on the negative battery lead, which I just do at a convention, we're actually tying the negative terminal into the water body. The ground system is grounded into the water, so when we put the negative terminal on the ground system, it's like we're putting it in the water. The positive terminal is on the aluminum. So now our multimeter is between the water and the aluminum, and now we're measuring the current flow from the aluminum into the water as it moves towards the thermostat. On the bench test, we can actually wire the thermostat itself so we can get a clean reading on it. Here we don't have access, but we don't need access because we know that the electrons that are flowing out of the aluminum are moving towards the thermostat. So this is plenty for data for us to collect to understand what's happening here. So inside the engines, this is what you're ending up creating. This is a zinc sleeve that ran in a bench test for 175 hours. You can see all of that pitting. This is the same thing that would be happening to this aluminum if we ran it for 175 hours. The difference is the zinc is more reactive. So what are we doing with this anode? Why does it work so well? Well, the rest of the anodes in the system are very far from the thermostat. So this piece, which is why Suzuki started making this replaceable, ends up giving itself up. But this is not just happening here. The water from these engines is flowing up through the impeller and it's getting thrown to the very top where the thermostat is. And so it's traveling by a lot of aluminum. The number of electrons that are flowing out of this aluminum is in the hundreds of trillions at just a negative 0.1 milliamp. So that means you're losing about 60 trillion atoms at a second, per second. That can only happen from a certain volume, a certain area. You wouldn't be able to lose that many atoms from one single spot, partly because the electrons are all negatively charged and they can only be so close to each other. Speaking of that, the reason why with DC current you see a positive or a negative, depending on if you switch these, you would see a positive current. As it's set up, we see a negative current. The reason is the electrons are negatively charged, they're flowing towards the positive terminal. So on a regular DC system like your car or the boat here, the electrons travel from negative to positive. Here, we're showing that the electrons are going the opposite way because they're traveling from the aluminum into the water. And so that's why we get a negative current. If you were to flip these, it would show positive. What's important is that after you install the anode, so you'll have one current this way, and then once you install the zinc anode, now the anode is giving up electrons. And so instead of the electrons flowing from the aluminum into the water, the electrons are flowing from the zinc into the water, but we don't have access to the zinc, just like we don't have access to the thermostat. So what we end up reading is that the current either zeroes out or it flips polarity. But why would it flip polarity? Well, that's because the surface area of my anode is so large and it's fully submerged, so the inside and the outside can give up electrons. It means that the surface area that can pull electrons out of the aluminum can be completely saturated because there's enough surface area here to do so. But then there's even extra. So not only can the zinc provide enough electrons to saturate the thermostat, it can provide electrons to the aluminum as well, which is why sometimes you see a negative reading on this engine and a positive reading on the other engine in my live test. Now, it's very simple. If you don't want this happening to the inside of your engine, you don't have to let it happen. You just install a new zinc anode and you're done with it. It's over. This is not something that needs to be argued about. It's not something that needs to be questioned. It's just scientific fact. If you don't believe it, all you gotta do is grab a multimeter and I promise you will believe it. And like I said, 100% money back guarantee right now. You have zero risk. If it doesn't take the current out of your engine, you just get a full refund. And it really is that simple. Visit waterdogoutboard.com today and save your engine.
Visit waterdogoutboard.com and get your motor protected today.